Have you guys ever seen a family absolutely destroy their own empire just because they wanted to stroke the golden child's ego? Today we have a case exactly like that. The sheer level of entitlement in this family is insane. Oh. My family business always acted like my older brother was the crown prince, and I was just the guy who carried his throne. So, I finally said nah, not doing that forever, and built something better for myself. But of course, they weren't done trying to pull me back. Before we get there, let me start from the beginning. Name's Arthur Vance, 31. I was the specialized field tech for my family's company. I work on heavy industrial machines. The kind of massive, roaring iron beasts where a misalignment of a fraction of a millimeter doesn't just cause a hiccup. It causes a catastrophic shutdown, thousands of dollars in damages, and big, angry men in suits making panicked phone calls. It's a job that requires calluses on your hands, grease under your fingernails, and a brain that can read a schematic like a roadmap. And when I say family, I mean my parents and my older brother, Marcus. Marcus is the kind of guy who somehow got crowned the future emperor of the place before he could even grow a full beard or figure out which end of a socket wrench to hold. I'm the guy who actually knows how to run the equipment, fix the machines, handle the on-site messes, and keep our clients from calling in a panic and pulling their contracts. Marcus's job is mostly pretending he invented modern business strategy while hiding behind a computer screen in an air-conditioned office, color-coding his email folders, and using corporate buzzwords that don't actually mean anything on a shop floor. Anyway, our shop's been around forever. My dad, Richard, started it before I was born. He built it from the ground up, which is something I always respected him for. But somewhere along the line, he lost the plot. He acts like the concrete walls of our shop should bow in reverence whenever Marcus walks by simply because Marcus has a 4-year business degree from a decent college. Meanwhile, I'm the one out there every single day, sweating through my heavy canvas work shirts, doing the part nobody else wants to learn. The specialized work. It's hands-on, highly technical, precision stuff that most people mess up even after months of intensive training. But sure, according to Richard, Marcus is the unquestioned genius of the Vance bloodline. On this particular morning, I was wrapping up a massive, high-stakes project for our biggest and most lucrative client. It was one of those miserable, complicated jobs where if you don't know exactly what you're doing, you can wreck a pile of delicate equipment and destroy a month's worth of factory scheduling in the blink of an eye. But for me, it was just another Tuesday. Thomas Sterling, the senior representative for the client, was standing there, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, sweating through his expensive shirt as he watched me. I carefully nudged the final alignment back to dead center and reset the primary sensor. I held my breath for a fraction of a second and hit the main power switch. When the machine came up smooth, no shudder, no grinding noises, no flashing red warning lights, Thomas finally exhaled a breath that looked like he'd been holding for an hour. "Man, Arthur, thank you," he said, shaking his head and wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "I swear to God, every time this massive thing glitches out, I just pray you're the one who shows up in the truck." I just shrugged, wiping a streak of black grease off my wrench with a rag. "Yeah, well, I like it when things work instead of exploding in my face. Keeps the day simple, Thomas." He laughed, the tension leaving his shoulders. You could tell he genuinely appreciated that someone actually knew what the hell they were doing. I started packing up my tools, carefully placing my ratchets and gauges into my customized rolling box. I was actually foolish enough to think that, for once, the day might end without the usual family nonsense. And then, right on schedule, as if summoned by the smell of completed labor, Marcus Vance strolls onto the factory floor. Perfect timing, as always, meaning every single difficult, dirty, and dangerous thing was already finished. He walks across the concrete like he's arriving for a Nobel Prize ceremony, wearing a crisp button-down shirt and polished shoes on a job site he's never once laid a finger on. "Excellent," Marcus said loudly, clapping his soft, lotion-smooth hands together once for dramatic effect. "My team executed my plan perfectly. This is exactly the outcome we projected in the morning briefing." I just stopped wiping my hands and stared at him. I didn't remember any plan, except me driving out here at 5 a.m. and fixing everything myself while he was probably still in his pajamas, sipping a latte and reading the Wall Street Journal. Thomas looked over at Marcus with this deeply confused half-smile, his eyes darting between my grease-stained uniform and Marcus's pristine collar. You could see the gears turning in Thomas's head, trying to place whether Marcus was making a weird joke or if he was just completely delusional. But Thomas is a polite, professional guy, so he just nodded tightly. Marcus kept going, completely oblivious to the room's energy, throwing out big, hollow corporate words like he'd swallowed a management textbook over breakfast. This is what streamlined interdepartmental coordination looks like, Thomas. I'll relay the success metrics to upper management by end of day. Upper management? I wanted to laugh out loud. It's a family business with 20 employees. Upper management is literally our parents eating cold sandwiches at the same desk in the back office. I stayed quiet. I leaned heavily on my toolbox, feeling the familiar ache in my lower back, watching my older brother act like he had masterminded a complex engineering feat that he couldn't physically perform even if you gave him a printed instruction manual and an instructional video. My absolute favorite part was when he vaguely gestured at the heavy equipment, waving his hand over the chassis like he actually knew what half of those intricate steel parts did. When Thomas turned his head back to me, his expression said absolutely everything. It was a mixture of deep confusion, second-hand embarrassment, and a tiny, stinging bit of pity. But he didn't call Marcus out. He's too respectful for that kind of drama on his company's time. Marcus eventually checked his shiny watch and wandered off, probably to go call our dad and tell him how his brilliant logistical strategy had just saved the multi-million-dollar account. I just sighed, feeling the exhaustion settling deep into my bones, and went back to wiping down my sockets. Does he always do that? Thomas asked quietly, his voice dropping an octave once Marcus was safely out of earshot. Only when he's awake, I said, not looking up. He can't lift a toolbox to save his life, but he's a world-class champion at lifting credit. Real talent he's got there. Thomas let out a short, sharp bark of laughter, but you could see his eyes narrow slightly. He was mentally filing that moment away. People in the real world notice a lot more than you think. They see who sweats and who talks. As I loaded my heavy gear into the back of my work truck, I caught myself staring at the shop doors, thinking about how many times this exact same song and dance had played out over the last decade. I do the grueling, back-breaking work, Marcus swoops in to take the spotlight and the handshakes, and my parents nod along proudly, treating him like he's some sort of prodigy guiding the company through economic storms with the sheer, undeniable power of his vocabulary. I could feel something cold and hard tightening in my chest. It wasn't an emotional breakdown. It was just that heavy, fed-up realization you get when you finally accept that everyone around you is entirely committed to pretending the sky is green, and they expect you to nod and agree. And worse, I knew the big, dreaded conversation about the business's future was coming soon. It had been hanging over the shop like a dark thundercloud for months. No matter how many impossible jobs I crushed, no matter how many loyal clients I kept from walking away, I already knew exactly how the verdict was going to be delivered. A couple of days after the big job at Thomas's facility, my dad, Richard, catches me in the hallway and tells me he wants to talk about the future of the company. Whenever Richard says that, it usually means I'm about to be forced to sit through a rehearsed speech, not participate in an actual conversation. I walk into the main office. The setup is already a perfect metaphor for my entire life. I'm directed to sit in the cheap, squeaky folding chair by the door. Richard and my mother, Eleanor, are sitting behind the massive oak desk in their plush, high-backed leather executive chairs. And off to the side, leaning against a filing cabinet with his arms casually crossed, is Marcus. Richard clears his throat loudly, puffing out his chest like a medieval king preparing to read a royal decree to a peasant. Arthur, Richard starts, his voice adopting that formal, distant tone he uses when he's trying to sound like a CEO instead of a guy who used to turn wrenches. Your brother Marcus will be officially taking over the business as president when I step down and retire. No build-up. No reflection on the years of my life I poured into this place. Just a straight, brutal execution of the facts. I glance over at Marcus. He is trying so hard to maintain a neutral face, but he's smirking. He's leaning back, looking exactly like a politician who just secured an election he rigged behind the scenes. Richard keeps talking, clearly expecting me to just sit there and absorb it. It makes the most sense. He's the oldest. He has the business degree. He inherently understands the corporate structure and the long-term financial viability of the company. Translation: Marcus likes holding clipboards, making pie charts, and using words like synergy and bandwidth. Before I can even open my mouth, Eleanor jumps in. She uses that soft, gentle, intensely supportive mom voice, the one she weaponizes whenever she wants to immediately shut down any legitimate disagreement without sounding like the bad guy. "Your father has thought about this for a very long time, Arthur," she says, leaning over the desk and giving me a look of deep, fake sympathy. This is simply the logical choice for the family's legacy. Marcus, emboldened by his coronation, decides he needs to add his 2 cents. It's really about high-level strategy, Arthur. Leading the enterprise into the next evolutionary phase of the market. He says this with the supreme confidence of a man who, just last month, forgot which way to turn a standard Phillips head screwdriver when trying to fix his own office chair. I let the silence hang in the room for a long moment. I let them finish congratulating themselves on their brilliant dynastic planning. Then, I lean forward, resting my calloused hands on my knees. "I'm not asking to be the boss," I say, my voice steady, though I can feel my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'm not asking to sit at that desk and play with spreadsheets, but I am asking for a stake, some actual ownership percentage, a real say in how things move forward on the operational side. I'm the one out in the field, every single day, keeping the actual work alive. I'm the one the clients trust. You know that, Dad. You built this place with your hands. You know the guy in the field is the one keeping the lights on." Marcus gives me this horribly patronizing, fake sympathetic nod, looking at me like I'm a toddler throwing a tantrum over a toy. "Arthur, listen. You're great at the physical side of things. You really are. But ownership, corporate governance, that requires a completely different cognitive skill set. Don't take it personally. It's literally personal, Marcus." I snap back, my eyes locking onto his. "This is a family business. It carries my last name, too." Richard frowns deeply, his face darkening. He leans forward, interlacing his fingers. "Your role is valuable, Arthur. But Marcus has the executive qualities needed to run things long-term. You'll still have a secure job here as the lead tech. And look, after I'm gone, you'll get your fair share of the money from the estate. You don't need to worry about your finances." That specific line hits me like a lead pipe to the jaw. It echoes in my head, louder than the hum of the warehouse outside. After I'm gone. So, my entire future, my entire worth to this family, boils down to, keep breaking your back making us rich, and wait for your father to die so you can get a payout. It was insulting on a level I hadn't fully prepared myself for. I swallow the bitter taste in my mouth and keep my voice completely level. "So, let me get this straight. I'm not family enough to earn a piece of ownership for my decade of sweat. But I am family enough to be told to shut up and be grateful for whatever scraps you throw me." Richard slams his hand flat on the desk, the sound echoing sharply in the small room. "Do not twist my words, Arthur. I am doing what is best for the business as a whole. You are being entirely too emotional and overreacting." And right then and there, the final puzzle piece clicks into place in my mind. The picture is crystal clear. They don't see me as a son who helped build and sustain this place. They don't see me as a partner. They see me as the guy who does the dirty, grueling work they consider beneath them. I am a pair of hands, a human forklift, a tool in the shed to be used until it breaks and nothing more. Marcus decides to finish things off, unable to resist one last arrogant jab. "You'll still be a crucial part of the team, Arthur. Just in the appropriate capacity." The appropriate capacity, meaning the capacity that keeps his hands clean and his bank account full. I stand up slowly. I don't shout. I don't kick the chair. "Then I guess I know exactly where I stand in this family," I say quietly. Richard starts rambling something about keeping things professional and separating family from business, but I completely stop listening. The meeting is over. Hell, they had made this decision years before this meeting ever took place. I was just there to be formally informed, like a lowly employee getting a mandatory schedule update. A few hours later, I'm out in the yard, loading heavy steel cables into the back of my truck. Eleanor walks out of the building. She has this calculated look on her face, like she'd been waiting by the window for her perfect moment to strike. "Arthur, honey, can we talk?" she asks, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I brace myself. A mother doesn't call a 31-year-old man honey unless she is about to aggressively adjust his attitude. She steps closer, putting a warm hand on my arm. "I know today was hard for you to hear. I want to understand what you're feeling." I nod, staring down at her. "I'm not taking it emotionally, Mom. I just want to be valued the exact same way you and Dad value Marcus." Her expression instantly shifts. The warm mother routine vanishes, replaced by that calm, cutting, ice-cold mode she uses when she's decided you are wrong and she is going to set you straight. "You're being dramatic," she says, her tone hardening. "Your brother has leadership qualities you simply do not possess, and that's perfectly okay. The world needs workers, Arthur. You should just focus on your strengths in the field and stop making this so incredibly hard for us. For us, not for me, not for the business. For them." She keeps going, twisting the knife. "This isn't something you need to challenge or fight. Just accept the role your father believes suits you. He's thought this through much more than you have, Arthur. Don't ruin the family dynamic out of jealousy." She says it like she's a wise guru bestowing a profound life lesson upon a foolish child. Every single word coming out of her mouth is completely dismissive, wrapped in a soft, maternal wrapper. She is gaslighting me, trying to make me feel crazy for wanting what I earned. I let her finish. I don't interrupt. I don't argue, because there is no arguing with someone who has already rewritten reality. When she finally pauses, expecting some grateful, submissive reply, I just look her dead in the eyes and say, "Got it." She smiles, genuinely believing she just fixed me. "Good. I knew you'd understand." She walks away, deeply satisfied with herself. I stand there in the gravel yard, realizing that wasn't a conversation at all. It was damage control. They weren't listening. They were managing a problem. They were filing me back into the tiny box labeled, "Does the heavy lifting, doesn't question the bosses." And that was the exact moment the very last drop of loyalty I had for the Vance family name evaporated into the air. After that horrific talk with my mother, something inside my brain just permanently switched off. It wasn't an explosive, dramatic anger. It was a cold, absolute finality. I was done. I walked into the shop the very next morning at 6 a.m., went straight into Richard's office before he even had time to take his coat off, and handed him a single, neatly folded sheet of paper. My 2 weeks' notice. I am old school about professional courtesy and paperwork. I keep hard copies of everything I ever sign. No grand speech, no emotional outburst, no screaming match. Just here. My last day will be exactly 14 days from this date. Richard looked up from his computer screen like I had just interrupted him reading the morning sports section to tell him the sky was falling. 2 weeks, he said, his thick eyebrows shooting up to his hairline. He looked genuinely baffled. "Are you out of your mind? You sure about this, Arthur?" "Pretty sure," I said, my voice deadpan. He leaned back in his big leather chair, steepled his fingers, and put on his best shrewd negotiator face. "Well, look, if this little stunt is about money, I can give you a small raise. A modest one, maybe an extra $1.50 an hour. You've earned a little bump. An extra $1.50. The number he offered was so insultingly low it almost forced a laugh out of my throat. It wasn't a raise for a decade of master-level technical work. It was spare change you find in your couch cushions, handed over with a bow on it to keep the pack mule walking. "I'm good," I said, turning toward the door. "My decision is made." He shrugged his shoulders dismissively, acting as if losing his only competent field technician was equivalent to misplacing a cheap pen. "All right, fine. Be stubborn. We'll manage perfectly fine without you." "Yeah, I bet you will." Word got to Marcus within about 3 minutes. He practically materialized in the doorway of the break room a moment later, acting like someone had just handed him a winning lottery ticket. "So, you're actually leaving?" he said, arms crossed over his chest, his smugness radiating off him in waves. "Got your feelings hurt and running away?" Didn't see that coming. He absolutely saw it coming. He orchestrated it. I nodded, pouring a cup of terrible break-room coffee. "Yep." He clicked his tongue against his teeth. "Hope you've got a solid plan, little brother. The industrial field isn't exactly overflowing with high-paying opportunities for your specific type of grunt work." "My type," I repeated. "Right?" He smirked, thoroughly enjoying the sound of his own voice. "Well, don't worry about us. I'll take over managing the field operations myself until we find some new temp to replace you. Shouldn't be too hard to find someone who knows how to use a wrench." I didn't even bother formulating a response. Marcus taking over the field operations was like putting a blindfolded toddler in charge of air traffic control. It was going to be a disaster, and I couldn't wait to not be there for it. But Marcus wasn't content to just let me work out my final 2 weeks in peace. He needed to punish me for walking away from his kingdom. He needed to make me bleed. The next afternoon, the real nightmare started. I was out on a minor call, realigning a conveyor belt assembly. It was tight, greasy work. My wrench slipped on a stripped bolt, and my hand slammed hard into the jagged edge of a rusted steel housing bracket. It wasn't a life-threatening injury, but it was a deep, nasty gash across the meaty part of my palm that immediately started pouring blood. I wrapped it tightly in a shop rag, cursed, and drove myself straight to the local urgent care clinic to get it stitched up. I walked up to the reception desk, my hand throbbing with a dull, heavy pain, and handed the nurse my company health insurance card. She typed the ID number into her computer. She frowned. She typed it again. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vance," the nurse said, looking up at me with a sympathetic wince. "The system is showing that this policy was terminated as of midnight last night." My blood ran cold. "Terminated? That's impossible. I'm still employed for another 13 days. It's an active company policy." "I'm sorry," she repeated gently. "The employer portal shows it was manually canceled. You'll have to pay out of pocket for the stitches today." I stood there in the sterile white clinic, staring blankly at the wall. Marcus, that petty, vindictive bastard. He hadn't just accepted my resignation. He had actively logged into the company benefits portal and illegally terminated my health insurance the very second I handed in my notice. Knowing full well I worked a dangerous job, I had to pull out my personal credit card and drop $600 I barely had to get 7 stitches in my hand. Oh my God. That is literally evil. He's bleeding at the clinic and this petty little sociopath cancels his health insurance? This dude has a seriously tough future ahead if someone doesn't knock some sense into him. What is wrong with his brain? The physical pain in my hand was completely eclipsed by the blinding, white-hot rage boiling in my chest. I drove straight back to the Vance family shop, skipping the rest of my shift. I didn't care anymore. I was going to pack up my gear and leave right then. I marched onto the shop floor, heading straight for my corner. I have a custom-built, heavy-duty rolling toolbox. Inside that box was over $4,000 worth of specialized diagnostic gear, high-end metric ratchets, torque wrenches, and micrometers. I bought every single piece of that equipment over the last 10 years using my own money, saved up from overtime pay. When I got to my bay, my heart stopped. There was a thick, heavy-duty steel chain wrapped securely around the entire toolbox, locked with a massive padlock. Slapped right on the front of my box was a bright yellow laminated sign that read, "Company property. Do not remove." Are you serious right now? Chaining up $4,000 of personal tools? I have to say Arthur is a way better person than I am. I would have taken a sledgehammer to that forklift right then and there. What would you do to get your stuff back? Looking for something? I spun around. Marcus was standing 10 feet away, leaning against a forklift, a sickeningly pleased smile plastered across his face. "Take the chain off my box, Marcus," I said. My voice was dangerously low. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to cross the distance and break his jaw. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. Can't do that, Arthur. Dad and I were reviewing the inventory. Since you bought those tools while you were receiving a salary from Vance Industries, and you used them on Vance Industries' time, corporate policy dictates they belong to the company. I have the personal receipts for every single wrench in that box. I roared, stepping toward him. Marcus didn't flinch. He just held up a hand. Take it to small claims court if you want, little brother. It'll take you 6 months and cost you more in legal fees than the tools are worth. But if you try to roll that box out of this bay today, I am calling the police and having you arrested for grand theft of company property. Your choice. He had me and he knew it. He had systematically stripped me of my health, my money, and now the very tools I needed to make a living anywhere else. He wanted me crippled. He wanted me crawling back, begging for my job at a lower wage. I stood there, looking at the heavy chain wrapped around a decade of my hard work. I looked at the brother I shared a bloodline with, seeing him for the absolute monster he was. You're going to regret this, Marcus? I whispered, the words carrying a terrifying calm. I promise you, you are going to choke on this. I turned my back on him. I didn't take a single thing. I walked out of the shop doors with nothing but the clothes on my back, a throbbing, stitched-up hand, and a burning desire to burn his precious empire to the ground. Despite Marcus stealing my tools and cutting my insurance, I still had 12 days left on my notice. A lesser man would have walked away and never looked back. But I am an old-school guy. I gave my word for 2 weeks, and I wasn't going to let them say Arthur Vance breached his contract or abandoned his post. Plus, I needed the remaining paychecks now that I had to completely rebuild my $4,000 tool collection from scratch. So I showed up the next morning, and the games immediately escalated. By lunchtime on Monday, I got a new schedule notification on my phone, courtesy of Marcus. He had completely wiped my board clean. Gone were the high-level diagnostic jobs, the complex repairs, and the direct interactions with our major clients. Instead, my schedule was filled with nothing but pointless, degrading side jobs. Stuff nobody in the company cares about. Stuff that doesn't matter to the bottom line. Stuff he normally pawns off on random minimum-wage temp workers. I noticed one glaringly obvious thing right away. Absolutely none of my remaining assignments included Thomas Sterling's facility, which was hilarious, considering I had been the sole lead tech on the Sterling account for 5 years. Marcus was terrified of letting me near his precious clients for fear I might tell them the truth about what was happening. I walked past Marcus's glass-walled office on my way out to the yard. He pretended not to see me, tapping dramatically and aggressively on his keyboard with his 2 index fingers, acting like he was managing a global financial crisis instead of sending petty emails. The next day, it was the exact same thing. Another schedule update. More mindless busy work. More filler jobs designed specifically to humiliate me. He sent me to the absolute furthest, dirtiest corners of our service area. I was tasked with cleaning out the toxic, sludge-filled grease traps at a defunct rendering plant. I was sent to organize mountains of rusted scrap metal in the pouring rain. He was doing everything in his power to keep me occupied in dark, filthy places where no one important would ever see me, hoping I would snap and quit so he could fire me for cause. I'd barely set foot on the main floor on Wednesday morning before I got yelled at to go fix a rusted-out secondary ventilation unit on the roof that literally hadn't been turned on since I was 19 years old. It was a pointless task on a broken machine we didn't even use anymore. After 2 miserable hours of busting my knuckles on rusted bolts in the sweltering heat, Marcus appeared behind me on the roof holding his ever-present clipboard. "Good progress," he said, nodding sagely at the rusted pile of junk like he had any actual idea what he was looking at. I ignored him, wiping sweat from my forehead, being careful not to split the stitches in my hand. "Starting tomorrow, I need you to train our new hire," Marcus announced, clicking his pen. "His name is Kevin. He's very green, so I need you to go slow. Thorough." I stopped and turned around slowly, glaring at him. "New hire? Since when?" "Since today," Marcus said brightly, a malicious twinkle in his eye. "Dad and I agreed it was the perfect time to expand the team. You can show him the ropes and teach him everything you know before you head out next week. Translation: keep Arthur completely isolated. Saddle him with an incompetent babysitting job. Give him zero interaction with the outside world. Try to extract every last drop of his technical knowledge to give to a cheaper employee, making Arthur feel entirely replaceable and irrelevant before he leaves. I looked him dead in the eye. You seriously want me to train a kid from scratch in one single week for a highly technical field job that takes a minimum of 6 months just to understand the basic safety protocols? Exactly, Marcus said, flashing a brilliant, fake smile. Do your best, Arthur. Be a team player for once. A team player. Coming from the guy who stole my tools and canceled my healthcare. It took superhuman restraint not to throw him off the roof. The newbie, Kevin, turned out to be completely harmless. He was a nice enough kid, maybe 22, but he was breathtakingly clueless. He didn't know the names of the most basic equipment. He didn't know locking procedures. He didn't understand the fundamental physics of the hydraulics we worked with. The poor guy showed up to a heavy machinery shop on his first day wearing canvas sneakers, and he didn't even bring leather work gloves. He followed me around like a lost puppy, excitedly asking questions, completely oblivious to the fact that Marcus had maliciously thrown him at me like a heavy sandbag just to slow me down. I didn't take it out on Kevin. He wasn't the problem. He was just collateral damage in my brother's ego trip. A real man doesn't abuse the kid at the bottom of the ladder. I taught Kevin what I realistically could without wasting both of our time. I showed him how not to lose his fingers in a press, and how to identify when a machine was about to blow a seal. Marcus hovered around us a couple of times a day, standing 10 feet away pretending to check his phone. He wanted to make it look like he was supervising, but I knew he was really just making absolutely certain I wasn't anywhere near a phone or a vehicle that could take me to the Sterling project. The absolute kicker, the moment that crystallized my hatred, happened on Thursday afternoon. I was walking back from the washroom, my boots quiet on the concrete floor. I paused near the open door of the break room. Marcus was inside, pouring coffee, talking loudly to our dispatcher, an older guy named Frank. "We'll be perfectly fine once Arthur is finally gone," Marcus was saying, his voice intentionally projected so it would carry down the hall. "Honestly, he's a dinosaur. He's not essential to the modern vision of this company. Never was. He's just a field hand. Replaceable labor." He said it loudly. He said it clearly. He made sure I heard it. Classic Marcus. Quiet, subtle digs behind closed doors were never enough for his fragile ego. He desperately needed an audience to validate his cruelty. I didn't stop walking. I didn't turn around. I didn't barge into the room and scream at him. I just kept walking right past the door, my face completely stony. But inside my head, behind my eyes, a massive, unquenchable fire had been lit. I added that specific insult to the very full, very dark column in my mind labeled, "Reasons I will show no mercy." The rest of the week dragged on in exactly the same agonizing pattern. Pointless assignments, demeaning busy work, urgent, drop everything tasks to fix garbage that nobody actually cared about. Zero access to the big clients. Marcus was frantically reshuffling my days like a desperate man trying to solve a puzzle called How to Erase Arthur Vance from History before he's even gone. By the 4th day, I didn't even bother checking the schedule app anymore. I just waited in the yard for whatever new, pathetic attempt at sabotage Marcus dreamed up while eating his breakfast. I stayed brutally professional. I did the grueling work without a single complaint. I clocked in at 5:55 a.m., and I clocked out at exactly 5 p.m. But my patience was running on absolute fumes, and Marcus could tell he was getting to me. He watched me from his window, seeing the dark circles under my eyes and the tight set of my jaw, which probably made him feel like a god. That was fine. Let him enjoy his hollow little victory. Let him sit on his cheap throne and pretend he was a king. A few more days, and he wouldn't have me around to micromanage and abuse anymore. He would actually have to run the company he claimed to be a genius at. When Friday finally hit, marking the end of my penultimate week, I sat in my old, beat-up truck for a long moment before turning the key. I gripped the steering wheel, my stitched-up hand throbbing in time with my heartbeat. I watched the Vance Industries shop through the dirty windshield. One more week. Just one. I wasn't sad. I didn't feel a shred of nostalgia. I wasn't second-guessing my decision for a fraction of a second. I was just profoundly, bone-deep tired of the petty, vindictive cruelty coming from people who shared my blood. People who were somehow shocked and offended that I no longer wanted to break my back to buy them luxury cars while they treated me like dirt. Marcus could keep playing king of the empty, crumbling castle. I was already halfway out the door, and I was going to take the entire kingdom with me. My final week rolled in with the exact same pathetic pattern. Marcus piling absolute nonsense onto my daily schedule, and me putting my head down and doing the grueling work anyway, because I am not the kind of man who ends his time anywhere looking sloppy. If anything, I worked cleaner, sharper, and faster just to make absolutely sure Marcus couldn't spin any narrative about my performance slipping when I was finally out the door. But even with my brother desperately trying to bury me under mountains of pointless, degrading tasks, fate has a funny way of forcing your hand. On Wednesday, 2 days before my last scheduled shift, a massive emergency call came in. It wasn't just any client. It was Thomas Sterling's main production facility, the big one, the account that literally kept the lights on at Vance Industries. One of their $1 million primary manufacturing units had gone down hard. It was completely stalled, hemorrhaging money by the minute. The only reason I even got that specific assignment was because the newbie, Kevin, didn't know which end of an impact driver to hold yet. Even Marcus, in his infinite arrogant delusion, realized that letting a 22-year-old kid handle highly explosive, expensive machinery would be a catastrophic lawsuit waiting to bloom. Marcus was cornered. He needed the machine fixed immediately to save his own reputation, and I was the only man in the state who could do it blindfolded. I drove to the facility, my jaw clenched, my stitched-up hand gripping the steering wheel. I didn't have my heavy-duty rolling toolbox anymore, thanks to my brother's blatant theft. So I had to throw a loose, mismatched assortment of spare wrenches and diagnostic meters into a canvas duffel bag. It was humiliating, but I pushed the anger down deep into my gut. I walked onto the massive factory floor, canvas bag in hand, expecting to see Thomas Sterling waiting by the broken unit, sweating and pacing like he usually did. Instead, standing beside Thomas was a man I had only ever seen from a distance. Bob Harrison. Bob was the senior VP of operations, Thomas's boss, and the big dog of the entire facility. Bob is the kind of man who does not waste a single motion or a single word. He had a face carved out of granite, sharp, calculating eyes, and he wore a pressed charcoal suit that somehow looked perfectly clean even in a dusty, oil-stained factory. He gave me a single, curt nod when I approached. "Arthur," Bob said, his voice deep and entirely devoid of small talk. "Good timing. We have a massive problem." Thomas gave me a tight, nervous little smile that immediately told me this wasn't a normal service visit. Something heavy was brewing in the air. Bob didn't offer a greeting or a warm-up. He pointed a thick finger at the massive, silent machine looming behind them. "We've been having continuous, catastrophic issues with this specific unit for 3 days. Your brother sent another tech out here yesterday while you were allegedly unavailable. That tech spent 4 hours poking around, billed us for emergency labor, and the machine crashed again 20 minutes after he left. Walk me through exactly what's going wrong. Now, straight to the exam. No fluff. Fine by me." I dropped my canvas bag onto the concrete and crouched down, unlatching the heavy steel access panel. I didn't need to run a full diagnostic. I could smell the ozone and the burnt hydraulic fluid. "This model overheats and triggers a safety shutdown when the internal alignment drifts even a fraction of a millimeter," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the hollow chassis. "And whoever your last tech was, probably the guy Marcus sent trying to prove we don't need me, tightened the primary housing bracket completely wrong." I grabbed a flashlight and pointed the beam at the misaligned steel bracket. "He overtorqued the left side and left the right side loose. This causes the internal pressure sensor to read false spikes. The machine thinks it's about to explode, so it kills the power to save itself." Bob watched me without reacting, his hands buried deep in his suit pockets. Thomas stood behind him, looking like a nervous referee trying not to influence a championship match. I grabbed a wrench from my bag. It wasn't my good wrench, but it would do. I loosened the housing, physically shoved the heavy bracket back into perfect alignment with my shoulder, and tightened the bolts down fast, clean, and even. "There," I said, standing up and wiping the grease off my hands with a rag. "The sensor should read completely accurate now. If it doesn't, I'll bypass it and recalibrate the board manually, but 9 times out of 10, this specific incompetence is the reason." I reached over and hit the main power breaker. The massive machine shuddered once, drew a massive breath of electricity, and began to hum. It was a perfect, smooth, rhythmic purr. No grinding, no warning lights, absolute perfection. Bob glanced over at Thomas. Thomas just nodded silently, a look on his face that clearly said, "See? This is exactly what I was talking about." As I closed and latched the steel panel, I couldn't resist throwing a final piece of truth onto the table. If Marcus sent someone else for this today, you'd probably be looking at a minimum 3-hour delay, a completely fried motherboard, and an invoice blaming the manufacturer for faulty parts. So, congratulations, gentlemen. You got the upgraded service package today. Thomas snorted, trying to cover a laugh with his hand. Bob Harrison, however, didn't laugh. He actually cracked a very small, very genuine smile. It wasn't a big display, but from a man like Bob, it was enough to say he deeply appreciated someone who didn't dance around the ugly truth. Bob stepped closer, invading my personal space just a bit, testing my nerve. "You know your work, Arthur. You don't guess. You know." "That's the entire idea, Mr. Harrison," I replied, meeting his intense gaze without blinking. Bob didn't rush his next move. He let the heavy noise of the factory settle around us, acting like a man who wanted to be absolutely, fundamentally certain before he spoke his next words. Then he dropped the bomb. "What would it take for you to run this entire maintenance operation in-house for us? Cut out Vance Industries entirely. No corporate fluff, no fake flattery, just a straight, undeniable proposition." I slowly wiped my hands on my rag, my brain shifting gears into overdrive. Most guys would freeze at a question like that. They'd start stuttering, or acting overly grateful, or immediately lowball themselves just to secure the life raft. But I didn't. I had been brutally undervalued, manipulated, and robbed by my own blood for a decade. I knew exactly, down to the penny, what my skills were worth to a company of this size. So, I listed my terms clean and hard. I'd want a 5-year guaranteed contract, locked pay with annual inflation bumps, I said, my voice steady. I want complete, unquestioned control over choosing the equipment, because I am not using bargain bin trash. I want a massive, immediate budget to replace the $4,000 worth of personal tools my brother just illegally locked up. I want 2 full-time technicians under me that I interview, hire, and train myself. And if I'm running this department, I want the actual title of Director of Operations and the authority that comes with it. Not a pretend title. No middle management breathing down my neck. Bob studied my face, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And your salary requirement?" I told him the number. It was a big number. It wasn't exaggerated, and it wasn't greedy, but it was an honest, heavy reflection of the immense value I was about to bring him. Thomas's eyes widened slightly, a clear indicator that I had just aimed for the fences. Bob Harrison didn't even blink. He gave a slow, impressed nod. "Reasonable," Bob said, his voice flat. "Actually, given the disaster you just saved us from, it's more reasonable than I expected." He turned his head and glanced at the massive production line humming beautifully beside us. "Every single hour that line stalls, this company burns hundreds of thousands of dollars. I have a standing, discretionary budget to permanently fix that bleeding. Human resources will paper the details by tomorrow morning." Bob turned back to me, extending a firm, calloused hand. "I want to know right now if you want the chair, Arthur." I looked at his hand. I thought about my father's dismissive sneer. I thought about my mother telling me to know my place. I thought about Marcus chaining up my livelihood and cutting my medical insurance to watch me bleed. "I'm not trying to be a billionaire, Mr. Harrison," I said, gripping his hand firmly. "I just want my paycheck and my title to match my sweat." Bob shook my hand, a solid iron grip. "Fair enough, Arthur. You've got yourself a department." As I walked out of that massive factory, carrying my pathetic canvas duffel bag, I didn't feel shocked. I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt a deep, anchoring steadiness in my chest. I had real options now. Options I had bled for. I had just single-handedly gutted my brother's company of their largest revenue stream, and I hadn't even raised my voice to do it. I figured if I was going to take the monumental job with Bob Harrison and completely sever the financial artery of Vance Industries, I was going to tell my family face-to-face before anything was legally finalized. Not because they deserved the professional heads-up, and certainly not because I owed them a damn thing. I wanted to do it because I am not a snake. I don't hide in the grass like Marcus. I wanted it done clean, in the daylight, looking them dead in the eyes when I dropped the match. I picked the morning of my final Friday to break the news. But the universe has a sick sense of humor, and my dad, Richard, decided he wanted to play one last round of emotional manipulation the night before. I was walking through the darkened shop late Thursday evening, grabbing my jacket to leave, when Richard stepped out of his office. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped, but he still carried that arrogant aura. "Arthur, got a minute?" he called out. His tone wasn't his usual clipped, aggressive, business-first bark. It was soft, careful. It was the exact tone he used when he suddenly remembered he was supposed to sound like a father instead of a boss. I stopped, my hand resting on the heavy metal door frame. "What's up?" He stepped closer, folding his arms across his chest like he was preparing to deliver ancient wisdom. "I know things have been extremely tense between you and Marcus lately, but tomorrow is your last day, and before you officially walk out that door, you need to deeply understand something." He paused, letting the heavy silence fill the garage, giving his impending speech some theatrical weight. "Family comes first, Arthur. Always." There it was. Not an apology for how they treated me. Not an offer to buy back my stolen tools. Not an ounce of regret for Marcus canceling my insurance while I was bleeding in an urgent care clinic. It was a command wrapped in cheap, manipulative sentiment. I didn't answer. I just stared at him, my face a mask of stone. So he kept going, emboldened by my silence. "You have to remember who gave you your very first job," Richard lectured, his voice gaining that familiar, condescending edge. "Remember who trained you. Remember who made sure you always had a warm place here, even when you made mistakes as a kid. Your brother Marcus needs you right now. He's stressed. He's taking on a massive leadership burden. This business needs you. Don't throw your entire legacy away just because you're throwing an emotional tantrum over a title." I stood there in the dim light of the shop, catching every single line for exactly what it was. Pure, unadulterated guilt. Control dressed up as fatherly care. Nothing had changed. Not an inch of growth. There was zero acknowledgement of the sweat equity I had built. Just the blind expectation that I owed them my life, indefinitely, simply because we shared a last name. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly when he finally stopped talking. Richard blinked, visibly thrown by the absolute 0-degree temperature of my voice. No. I just wanted to say that before you do anything foolish tomorrow. I want you to sleep on it. Marcus is willing to let you stay if you apologize. Right?" I said, pulling my jacket on. "Good to know. See you tomorrow, Dad." I walked out into the cold night air before he could utter another syllable. Whatever microscopic, naive fraction of hope I had left that maybe they would finally understand, it completely evaporated right there on the oil-stained concrete. The next morning, my final day, I walked into the main office at 8 a.m. sharp. Richard, Eleanor, and Marcus were already gathered around the big oak desk. It looked like someone had sounded the emergency family meeting alarm. Marcus was sitting with his feet propped up on a chair, looking incredibly smug. Eleanor was sipping tea, and Richard was shuffling papers. Good. They were all in the blast radius. Saved me the trouble of repeating myself. I stood in the center of the room, keeping my hands out of my pockets, my posture perfectly straight. "I'm taking another job," I said. My voice was loud, direct, leaving absolutely no room for misinterpretation. "I received an offer to run an in-house department. I am accepting it, and my employment here ends effectively right now." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Richard's face went violently red. He slammed his hands on the desk. "Absolutely not. You don't have another job lined up, Arthur? Stop bluffing." Eleanor gasped loudly, pressing her hand to her chest like I had just announced I was joining a violent cartel. "Arthur, you cannot do that to us. After everything your father and I have sacrificed for you, you're going to abandon your family?" Marcus, however, didn't yell. He just slowly lowered his feet from the chair, a nasty, venomous grin spreading across his face. He thought he held the ultimate trump card. "That's a cute story, little brother," Marcus said, dripping with arrogance. "But you do realize you signed an incredibly strict non-compete clause when you became a senior technician, right? You legally cannot work for anyone in the industrial sector within a 200-mile radius for 3 years. If you take another job, I will personally sue you into absolute bankruptcy." There it was. He couldn't just let our dad yell. Marcus had to add his own special brand of sociopathic manipulation to the mix. I didn't flinch. I actually smiled. A cold, hard smile that wiped the grin off his face instantly. "No, I didn't," I said smoothly. "I went through my personal files last night. I keep hard copies of every single piece of paper I've ever signed since I was 18 years old. I read every line." I took a step closer to Marcus, leaning over him. "Show me the non-compete, Marcus. Show me where my signature is." Marcus blinked, his eyes darting to Richard. "What? The non-compete?" I repeated, my voice rising like thunder. "You're the brilliant president of this company, right? Pull it out of the filing cabinet right now. Put it on the desk." Marcus froze. He swallowed hard. There was no folder. There was no document. There was no legally binding PDF saved on a hard drive. There was absolutely nothing, because the non-compete did not exist. He had fabricated the threat entirely out of thin air, hoping I was stupid enough to blindly believe him. Oh man, that is so embarrassing for Marcus. He thought he had this huge checkmate moment and he literally just made it up. How pathetic do you have to be to fake a legal document in front of your entire family? I laughed. It was a harsh, scraping sound. "You made it up, didn't you? You pathetic, lying coward." Marcus's jaw locked tight. He desperately tried to maintain his composure, trying to formulate another lie to hold his crumbling illusion together. But he had nothing. His silence confessed everything. Richard, desperately trying to regain control of his imploding kingdom, pointed a finger at me. "Regardless of a piece of paper, you owe loyalty to the blood in your veins, Arthur. You cannot just leave because you feel overlooked." "Overlooked?" I shot back, the anger finally breaking through the ice. "You told me the entire business goes to Marcus because of a piece of paper from a college, while he doesn't even know how to reset a basic hydraulic pump. You let him steal $4,000 of my personal tools. You let him illegally cancel my health insurance while I was sitting in a clinic bleeding." Eleanor stood up, her voice shaking, trying the soft-voiced guilt trip one last time. "Arthur, please. Your father knows what's best. You shouldn't betray us over something so petty and emotional. You're tearing this family apart." "Emotional, right?" I looked at all three of them. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just profoundly, eternally done. "You want my loyalty, but you refuse to give an ounce of it back. You want my broken back, my 60-hour weeks, my blood on the gears, and my silence. And the second someone else in the real world sees my actual value and offers to pay me for it, suddenly you care about family. It's funny how that works." "Who?" Marcus suddenly blurted out, panic finally breaking through his arrogant facade. "Who offered you a job? Nobody is hiring right now." I looked right at Marcus, relishing the moment I had been waiting for all week. "Bob Harrison," I said calmly. I'm the new director of operations for Thomas Sterling's facility. I'm taking the entire account in-house. You will never see another dime from them." The silence that hit the room was deafening. It was as if I had detonated a bomb and sucked all the oxygen out of the building. The Sterling account was 60% of Vance Industries' gross revenue. Without it, they were dead in the water. Marcus's face twisted in pure, unadulterated terror. He looked like he had been physically punched in the stomach. "You're leaving us to fall apart," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking hysterically. "You selfish, spiteful bastard. You planned this." I turned to him, zipping up my jacket. "The only person you care about is yourself, Marcus. And you're terrified because you know that starting on Monday, when the machines break, you are going to have to go out there and fix them yourself. And everyone is finally going to see what a fraud you are." Eleanor reached out, crying now, trying to grab my arm. "Arthur, don't walk out that door. We can discuss this." "This was never a discussion," I said, stepping away from her grasp. "It was an execution, and now it's over." I turned my back on my blood and walked out of the office. No screaming, no dramatic door slam, just a quiet, permanent exit that they had absolutely zero control over. I walked out into the morning sun, pulled out my cell phone, and dialed Bob Harrison. "Morning, Arthur," Bob answered on the first ring. "I'm out," I said. "I'm completely clear." "Good," Bob replied, his voice a steady anchor. "Legal already cleared the conflicts. No non-solicit, no non-compete. HR is sending the packet today. And Arthur? I authorized the tool budget. Go buy the best gear on the market. Your pay starts right now." I spent the first few mornings of my new life waking up and not immediately feeling a crushing sense of dread. There was no toxic workflow waiting for me, orchestrated by Marcus. There were no manipulative family-first lectures from Richard. There was no pretending that the shop wasn't completely falling apart unless I physically held the walls together with my bare hands. Just the quiet sound of my coffee maker, the peace of a sunrise, an actual breathing room in my chest. When a buddy of mine called and asked how the transition felt, I just told him the honest truth. It's really nice not being pissed off before the sun even comes up. By the time Monday rolled around, I was more than ready to get moving again. Walking into the massive Sterling facility on my first official day felt entirely different than walking into Vance Industries. It wasn't overwhelming or overly flashy, but it was profoundly professional in a way I had never experienced. The concrete floors were clean. The air conditioning hummed quietly instead of sounding like a dying jet engine. I had a dedicated, assigned parking spot with my name painted on it, meaning I wasn't circling a gravel lot fighting delivery vans for a place to put my truck. The workspace Bob Harrison set aside for my new department was massive, open, and logically organized. It wasn't the cramped, chaotic, hazard-filled dungeon I was used to at my dad's place. And the office they gave me? It was small, but it was solid. I had a heavy metal desk, locked storage cabinets for secure schematics, a mini fridge, and a door that actually closed and locked. I stood in the center of the office, tracing my hand over the cool metal of the desk. I wasn't starstruck by any of it. I just looked around and thought, yeah, this is how a place that actually values human beings operates. There was no manufactured drama, no petty power games. No one walking past my door acting like they were doing me a massive favor by allowing me to breathe their air. Bob walked in a few hours later to go over the final operational details. "It's your department, Arthur," Bob said, tossing a thick binder of maintenance schedules onto my desk. "Build it exactly how you want it. You have full autonomy. If you need anything else, you come directly to me. No middlemen." In that first week, I finalized my massive equipment order. I didn't hold back. I bought real, professional-grade gear. Snap-on ratchets, laser alignment tools, thermal imaging cameras. I wasn't buying the cheap, bargain bin trash my dad always bought just because he thought it was good enough to get the job done. I picked out the tools that worked flawlessly, the tools that lasted a lifetime, and the tools that would guarantee production never slowed down. Marcus could keep my old rusted wrenches. I was playing in the major leagues now. Next on my agenda was building my team. Bob gave me the green light to hire 2 full-time technicians. I ran the interviews myself. Bob told me to trust my gut instincts, so I did. I didn't care about fancy resumes or corporate buzzwords. I cared about calloused hands and the ability to diagnose a problem under pressure. I hired Bill first. Bill was 55 years old, a seasoned veteran who had just been unfairly laid off from a dying manufacturing plant across town because he was too expensive. He knew his tools, he didn't complain, and he had forgotten more about hydraulics than Marcus would ever learn in a lifetime. Next, I brought in Jimmy. Jimmy was 24, young, hungry, and a little rough around the edges. But he was sharp, he listened, and most importantly, he was willing to get his hands dirty without acting like he already knew everything about the world. Within a few days, Bill and Jimmy were on the Sterling payroll. I didn't treat them the way Richard and Marcus treated me. I trained them the way a real leader should. I gave them clear, concise instructions. I checked my ego at the door. I didn't treat them like pack mules or scream at them when they made a minor mistake. I patiently showed them how the complex equipment worked, explained the physics of why certain microalignments mattered, and taught them how to anticipate and avoid the cascading failures that eat up a factory's time. They respected me because I bled with them. If a machine went down in the mud, I was right there in the mud beside them, turning the wrench. They picked up the system incredibly fast. Within the first month, the three of us were running the entire in-house maintenance setup like a well-oiled machine. Thomas Sterling was thrilled. Bob Harrison was impressed. And every single day felt straightforward. Work hard, solve complex problems, earn a fantastic living, and go home to drink a beer without carrying a mountain of bitter resentment on my shoulders. It was a wild, foreign concept to me. I hadn't spoken a single word to my family since the morning I walked out of that office. I didn't make a grand announcement on social media. I didn't send dramatic, angry text messages. I didn't write long, emotional emails. I just completely severed the cord. I didn't reach out, and for the first few weeks, they didn't either. It wasn't even about holding a grudge anymore. It was just peace. A deep, quiet peace that I hadn't experienced in over 10 years. But of course, a narcissist like Marcus couldn't just let me walk away and win. About 3 weeks into my new role, Thomas pulled me aside during a routine floor walkthrough. He looked a little uncomfortable, glancing over his shoulder before he spoke. "Thought you should know, Arthur," Thomas said quietly, leaning in. "Right after you walked out of your dad's place, Richard and Marcus called Bob Harrison directly. They were frantic. I didn't even flinch. I just wiped down a gauge and waited. That sounded exactly like the Vance playbook. Fight like hell to maintain absolute control only after they realize they've completely lost it." "What did they say?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Thomas shook his head, looking disgusted. "They tried to talk Bob out of hiring you. Marcus claimed you were unstable, that you stole company property, and that you were entirely unqualified to run a department of this scale. They practically begged Bob to cancel your contract and reinstate Vance Industries as the primary vendor." I felt a brief flash of heat in my chest, but it faded quickly. "And how did Mr. Harrison respond to that?" Thomas smirked, a real, wide grin breaking across his face. Bob listened in complete silence for about 2 minutes. Then he said, "Arthur just saved me $200,000 in 30 minutes. You clowns cost me that much in a week." And then he hung up the phone. One clean motion. Phone down, conversation permanently over. He blacklisted Vance Industries from the vendor registry 10 minutes later. Yes, that is exactly what they deserve. They tried to ruin Arthur one last time and Bob just completely shut them down. That was wild. I love Bob. Don't you guys just love it when karma hits instantly? I didn't say much to Thomas after that. I just thanked him for the heads up and went back to work. But inside my chest, a massive weight finally lifted. Bob's reaction confirmed every single brutal decision I had made. I had successfully escaped a toxic wasteland built entirely on manipulation, and I had successfully stepped into a fortress that recognized, respected, and fiercely protected actual competence. Later that week, I heard through the grapevine, my cousin Tessa, who still worked in the accounting department at Vance Industries, that the family business was rapidly downsizing. Without the massive Sterling account propping them up, Marcus's total lack of business acumen was finally exposed to the harsh light of day. He didn't know how to bid for new contracts. He didn't know how to accurately estimate labor costs. A couple of their smaller, loyal clients had experienced massive equipment failures, and because Marcus had no competent techs left to send out, those clients closed their doors and pulled their contracts, too. Richard was forced to lay off 3 good mechanics and 2 office workers. Good, hard-working people who absolutely didn't deserve the fallout of my brother's staggering arrogance. I felt genuinely bad for those guys, but the rest of the empire, Marcus and Richard, not a shred of pity. Decisions have brutal, unavoidable consequences, especially in the industrial world. And when you bet your entire legacy, your entire financial future, on the golden boy son who can't even figure out how to fix a jammed pressure sensor, you deserve to lose everything. The bleeding at Vance Industries didn't stop. It accelerated. The week before Thanksgiving, Tessa sent me a quick text confirming that Marcus had officially lost 2 more mid-sized accounts. He had personally gone out into the field to try and repair a blown hydraulic manifold, stripped the threading on the main block, and caused a massive oil spill that cost the client thousands in EPA fines. The client sued Vance Industries. The walls were rapidly closing in on the empire Richard built, and the king was drowning in his own incompetence. About 3 months into my new role at Sterling, while I was sitting in my office reviewing the quarterly preventative maintenance budget, my cell phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but out of sheer habit, I picked it up. Arthur. A very familiar, heavy voice said. It was Richard. He spoke casually, his tone attempting to sound light and conversational, acting as if we hadn't ended our relationship with a screaming match that fractured our family forever. Been thinking about you, son? Richard said, the false warmth in his voice making my skin crawl. I leaned back in my heavy desk chair, staring out the window at the massive, perfectly functioning factory floor I now controlled. Aha! What kind of thinking, Dad? He cleared his throat, a nervous tick I hadn't heard from him in years. Well, he started, his voice dropping into a pseudo-business cadence. Things have been transitioning here. The market is tough. Marcus is doing a stellar job, but he's overwhelmed with the executive duties. I want to offer you an olive branch, a partnership. I let out a slow, silent breath, the sheer, unadulterated audacity of this man. A partnership? What kind of partnership? Well, Richard stammered slightly, clearly uncomfortable. We could work out a small, formal ownership percentage for you. Say 5% equity. You'd come back as the senior field manager. Now, you would still report directly to Marcus, of course. He's the president, he has to handle the final financial decisions. But you'd have a real stake in the game now. You'd be back home. I think it's a very fair, very generous compromise to heal the family. I stared at the ceiling of my office. It was almost comical. After everything that had happened, after they lost their biggest client, after they were sued, after they fired good men to keep the lights on, nothing had fundamentally changed in his mind. He was offering me a tiny, pathetic scrap of equity, absolutely zero real authority, and the privilege of coming back to break my spine working underneath the idiot brother who stole my tools and tried to ruin my life. Partnership in name only. A desperate, transparent attempt to buy back my skills at a massive discount to save his sinking ship. I almost laughed. I really did. Not an angry, bitter laugh. Just a laugh born out of pure, exhausted disbelief that he genuinely thought this garbage offer was remotely tempting to a man who had already conquered the mountain. Dad, I said. My voice was incredibly calm. It wasn't the voice of a rebellious son. It was the voice of a man who held all the cards. You already picked your future. You bet the entire house on Marcus. Now you have to stick with it. Richard didn't respond right away. The silence on the line was thick and heavy. Maybe, in his delusional reality, he actually expected me to break down crying, thank him for his incredible generosity, and come running back for the table scraps. Arthur, this is a very serious business offer, Richard finally said, his voice tightening with a mixture of panic and rising anger. Vance Industries is your legacy. You belong here with your family. And so is my answer, I replied smoothly, completely unaffected by his guilt trip. I am the director of operations here. I make triple what you ever paid me. I have a team I respect, and a boss who respects me. I am doing exceptionally fine exactly where I am. Arthur, please? Richard tried one final, desperate line, the arrogance finally stripping away to reveal the raw panic underneath. Marcus is struggling. The bills are piling up. Don't do this to your mother. It rolled right past me like water off a duck's back. They didn't care about me when my hand was bleeding in a clinic. I didn't care about their bills now. Tell Marcus to read a textbook, I said coldly. Goodbye, Dad. I ended the call, pressed block on the unknown number, and set the phone face down on my desk. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't pump my fist in the air. I just went back to reviewing my budget spreadsheets. That night, long after Bill and Jimmy had clocked out and gone home, I sat alone in my quiet office, finishing up some final compliance paperwork. I leaned back and thought about the chaotic, brutal 10-year journey that had finally led me to this exact chair. I thought about it not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but just quietly connecting the dots of my own life. I realized something profound in the silence of that room. I didn't wreck Vance Industries. I didn't betray my bloodline. I didn't steal their clients through lies, or scheme behind anyone's back in the dark. I simply stopped accepting a role that was specifically designed to keep me small, poor, and obedient. I demanded my worth, and when they refused to pay it, I took my skills to a market that would. Richard, Eleanor, and Marcus made deliberate, conscious choices about how they treated the man holding up their empire. I simply made the choice not to stay and be crushed by it. It was as simple and as brutal as the laws of physics I worked with every day. 14 months later, the maintenance department I built from the ground up at Sterling is running better than I ever imagined. The efficiency metrics are off the charts. My team is solid, loyal, and incredibly well-paid. My name is stamped on every major engineering project that comes through the doors, and absolutely no one, not a VP, not a manager, and certainly not a brother, talks over me in a meeting to steal the credit for my sweat. And the Vance family business? Last I heard through the industry grapevine, they are barely keeping the lights on in that dusty old shop. They had to sell off 3 of their service trucks just to make payroll. Marcus is still walking around in his clean button-down shirts, desperately pretending to anyone who will listen that the company is just going through a strategic transition period. And my parents still sit in that back office, surrounded by shrinking ledgers, acting as if they didn't personally choose this exact, miserable ending. I don't hate them anymore. Hate requires energy, and I refuse to spend another ounce of my energy on the Vance family. I just simply do not owe them a single thing. Turns out, for a man, finding true peace isn't about actively destroying your enemies or screaming for validation. It's about knowing your exact value, looking the people who disrespect you dead in the eye, and having the courage to finally walk away from the table when respect is no longer being served. Wow, that story has a lot of stuff, from stolen tools to corporate sabotage. Arthur handled this perfectly. I am so sick and tired of these entitled parents and their golden children. They literally treated Arthur like a human forklift and nothing more. The sheer audacity of the dad to call back months later and offer him a tiny 5% equity while they are going bankrupt? Are you kidding me? They learned absolutely nothing. They deserved to lose the business. Period. User TechWizard99 says, Arthur is a saint. I wouldn't have given them 2 weeks' notice. I would have walked out the second they gave my company to a guy who can't hold a screwdriver. Hey TechWizard99, you are so right. But Arthur sticking around for those 2 weeks just to completely steal their biggest client right under their noses? That is pure perfection. User Just Sayin 2024 says, why didn't Arthur call the cops for the stolen tools? $4,000 is a felony. Look, Just Sayin 2024. I know it's frustrating, but Marcus was betting on Arthur not wanting to waste 6 months in court. Arthur played the long game, got a massive budget from his new boss to buy better gear, and completely bankrupted them instead. Way better revenge if you ask me. User Golden Boy Tears says, Marcus trying to fake a non-compete clause is the funniest thing I've read all year. Right? Golden boy tears. I was dying laughing. The guy couldn't even lie properly. The silence when Arthur asked him to pull out the document must have been deafening.